Okay, so tell me a little bit about Disability Solutions. How did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Disability Solutions is a part of a nonprofit based out of Connecticut, New York. And we work with companies around the world to help them build anything related to how you learn about a job, all the way up to getting and growing in your career for people with disabilities. So, how we got started is actually a super fun story. So, a little bit first about me, and then I'll lead into it. And my name is Julie Sowash. I'm the executive director of Disability Solutions and one of the founders. And my background is really in um, affirmative action and federal contractor compliance. And I also managed a state grant or a federal grant for the state of Indiana to help overcome barriers to employment for people with disabilities in Indiana. And I live with hidden disabilities. And so about 12 years ago now, the not our parent nonprofit called Ability Beyond, PepsiCo has been on our board of directors for years, decades, probably at this point. And they reached out to the CEO at the time and said, "Hey, you know what? We're doing pretty good hiring people of color. We're figuring out women. We're trying to figure out veterans, but we really are struggling to figure out how to hire people with disabilities. If we pay you, will you help us build it?" And so the CEO called me and said, "Hey, will you come build this for Pepsi?" And I said, "Oh, hell yes, I will. Absolutely, 100%. You don't say no to that kind of opportunity." Um, so really we spent the first about 5 years um, building with Pepsi, trying to figure out, what really is the unlock to get people with disabilities to work. And from there, then, we built disability solutions because we identified that we had something really valuable that companies could put into place that we could help them with that actually resulted in people getting to work and people, leaders, having their minds changed about our community. And so fast forward now 12 years later, we work with about 70 companies around the world that we know of. Over 7,000 or almost, I'm sorry, over 8,000 people with disabilities have been hired. We've trained about 12,000 people leaders. And we just continue to try to spread our mission of changing minds and changing lives to have real, true disability inclusion at the companies that we work with.
Hmm. What kinds of services do you provide at Disability Solutions?
So our services are really directly related to the company, right? So we help companies figure out how to hire people with disabilities. What are the things that we are interested in from like a branding and a benefits perspective? What changes or adjustments do we need to make in the apply process to make sure people with disabilities are moving through the apply process in an equitable way? And so, from a kind of, if I flip that to a job seeker perspective, the services that we would offer are, we have a job board of the companies that we work with. You can check it out at disabilitytalent.org. And then we also do some sourcing and recruiting for companies that we work with in terms of, hey, if we know a company is looking for a certain position, we reach out to our community-based partners about those positions. And then sometimes we directly work within our own database to try to find job seekers that might be ready for that type of opportunity. And then finally, we do a lot of job seeker training. So the other thing that you can find on our site is some of the best practices around getting to work and some of the best practices around interviewing and those kind of things for people with disabilities, job seekers with disabilities. And so we're sort of like a bridge between a company and the community. But a lot of our work is really focused on making sure that the employer is allowing and prepared for people with disabilities to move through the apply process.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So, like, what sorts of stakeholders do you partner with closely? Because, is it like companies? Who's involved?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we have a really broad stakeholder group. So first of all, primarily we work with companies. So in a company, we work with the DEI leaders, we work with talent acquisition leaders, we work with human resources leaders, as well as business owners that we need to make sure are bought into investing in our community. And then we work with community-based organizations like a Goodwill, an ARC, Easter Seals, those kinds of organizations around the world to help make sure that they know that we have roles available within the companies that we work with and help them prepare their job seekers to get those jobs. And then we also have a commitment to our community as a whole to make sure that we are acting in a way that provides value. So we do everything is very data driven, very outcomes driven. We don't believe that in large part the disability community has been ignored and left out of DEI initiatives and corporate strategy around hiring. And so we want to make sure that we are spreading the word that, hey, here are results, here's proof in the pudding that people with disabilities can be hugely impactful to your organizations, and this is how we're going to spread the word.
Mm-hmm. That was like literally my next question, which is like, what impact does your organization have on communities as a whole, particularly the disability community?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is that we also like to talk about is the power of understanding how marginalized communities are often pitted against each other by society, by corporations. You know, we can only hire or focus on hiring Black Americans or Brown Americans or LGBTQ Americans or disabled Americans, and really companies have the capacity and the ability to work within all of those communities, all of those underrepresented communities. And when they're inclusive of people with disabilities, it also has a major impact on other underrepresented communities. So, for example, about one in three people who identify as LGBTQ also identify as a person with a disability. About 25% of Black Americans have a disability. So when you're inclusive of us, it also helps you to be more impactful in other communities that are also underrepresented, and probably with those who have multiple identities, that they are the most marginalized and need the most opportunity. So that's really what we like to talk about. And we really like to talk about how much value our community brings to not just the workforce, but to the world. And when you build universally for us, you build universally for everyone.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, how do you combat the stigma of disability, the ableism going on in the disability community from your perspective as an organization?
Yeah, I mean that's something that we confront every single day. I will say, if I can think of something positive, is in the 13 years that I've been lucky enough to lead this team and to do this work, things have changed dramatically. I've seen dramatic improvements on, especially on the company side, about people's willingness to think of us as a valuable talent source. I can tell you, Laszlo, 10 years ago, I would call a company and say, hey, hire people with disabilities. We have great value. And they would laugh and hang up on me, right? There was just no interest. And now I feel like we have a long way to go, but there is growing interest in our community as a valuable source of talent, as a valuable source of consumer branding. People are starting or companies are starting to target us in their advertising, and we're seeing more representation. And I think, though, what we try to do every single day is be transparent about who we are. So I live with hidden disabilities, which are different than your disabilities. And how do we normalize Julie? How do we normalize Laszlo? How do we just start to think about people with disabilities in our everyday lives, and that we are interested in the same things people without disabilities are, having a great career, having a family, having a loved one, having, you know, whatever that American dream is for us, that we have that same dream just like other Americans without disabilities. And I think that's our greatest asset, is really just that storytelling that takes away from sort of the, you know, BS inspiration porn kind of stuff, and really talks about us as ordinary people who want to have lives, who want to be able to do things that are impactful at a multitude of levels. And that really means just seeing us as everyday humans.
Mm-hmm. Yep.